Hello, and welcome to PremiumBytes, where we shine a light on the unsung world of insurance technology leaders. I am Sudhar Krishnamachary, one of your co-hosts, and with Samir Ahmed, our other co-host, we're here to have meaningful conversations about the evolving technology landscape inside the insurance industry. Let's acknowledge it. Being an insurance firm CIO or Chief Information Officer is one of the toughest leadership roles in today's world. You've got a risk-averse mindset baked into the very fabric of the industry, a legacy estate that must complement the modern tech, and a talent crisis from both the retiring side and next-gen recruiting side. And then you got the slower pace of innovation. We see it because we're right there in the trenches with you as consultants day in and day out. Our mission is to deep dive, have conversations that carry substance, offer practical insights, and help you validate and navigate the relevant challenges of being an effective CIO in the insurance sector. So thank you for joining us on this adventure. Let's jump right into our next conversation.
Hey, good afternoon, Samir.
Hey, good afternoon, Sudhar. How's it going?
Going well. Welcome back to our next episode on a cold, mildly snowy day here in New Jersey.
Yeah, it's been cold and snowing here in Michigan as well, Detroit area. So winter's upon us. Thanksgiving coming
awesome.
up.
That's awesome. I think we have an exciting topic on this next episode. I guess we should probably tell the story of how we landed on this topic. We kind of, I remember our first episode was the hot topic of AI, and then we have kind of swirled around different sets of topics around AI. And data and analytics and cybersecurity and cloud and transformation and core transformation on the cloud, et cetera. But let me ask you to introduce the topic we have for today, which is slightly off the usual set of topics that we have touched, but nevertheless was one of the topics we've always had.
Yeah. So usage of low-code, no-code platforms, right? That's what was on our list as a topic to cover at some point, and that point is now. And coincidentally, in prep for this, we were looking at who all is in the space and all that, what's changed over the last few years, and looks like Gartner just recently redid their Magic Quadrant, so timing is nice. We can provide a fresh look of that as well as we get through in our conversation here.
Yeah. But it sounds like, if you can pull that report real quick and, without digging into the very specifics of this Gartner report, what continues to be clear is that I think the market has consolidated in the last 10 years on this low-code, enterprise low-code platform, as they call it. And, clearly a dozen or so global vendors are prominent in this space. But used to be, at some point, I remember reading somebody saying that there's probably, 200, 300 players in this low code space. But even from what I understand, Samir, is that even Gartner is somewhat, has over the years, changed the narrative on this, defining the space and calling it out. Is it?
Yeah. I mean, look, it definitely happens in all these spaces, right? It starts out with a certain positioning in the market, and then as the software providers, they evolve their products in response to what customers are asking for, and customers evolve what they can do based on what's being provided. So it definitely takes shape. So this space, I think, I don't know exactly when, but looks like 4 or 5 years ago, this phrasing of enterprise low-code application platforms was introduced, and that's how Gartner now defines the space. And in this year's report, right, so some interesting just things to point out, right? They say that the double-digit growth continues, but the main usage patterns are changing. So what's changing? They go on to say they have gone from being an extension of the core systems and quick development of simple app tools to playing an essential part in the development of complex, mission-critical business capabilities. Elsewhere in the report, I think they quoted that roughly 15% of businesses are using these enterprise low code app platforms for mission critical business capabilities. So
Yeah,
I see that as a plausible sort of statistic across all enterprises. But for insurance, I would not believe it for a second. I think insurers are still using, vendor provided or homegrown, traditional COBOL mainframe
or
systems
systems. Yeah,
for their core. Um, but the usage of low code app platforms at insurers is there, right? Probably. I mean, I'd be surprised if we have an insurer that's not using one of these in some
I
shape
would
or
say, yeah,
form.
I think 70-80% of them will have one or more of those dozen or so platforms, or maybe any one of the others that's not listed. But yeah, I would think certainly, I think the peripheral systems surrounding the core has been the prime use case inside insurance.
Yeah.
I should even say not peripheral systems, more like peripheral capabilities is where I see. Although we'll touch on this as we go down this episode in deconstructing the space. But I thought there was also an element of, the Gartner report touching on this idea that, Gen AI and LLM is kind of like creeping its way into this space as well. And it can be a wild, wild west, just like everywhere else.
Yeah. A little bit further on, right? They do provide some guidance, right? That IT leaders of organizations that rely on custom developed software should include LCAPs in their IT strategy. They should consider LCAPs for accelerated adoption of Gen AI in both app dev and UX. And then they should educate business stakeholders on new ways to deliver applications. So of course, right, this is all like just guidance and recommendation. The key thing here, right, is that if you're relying on custom developed software, none of this applies for packaged solutions.
Right. Right. I think it would help if we perhaps step out from the Gartner report and then just focus on this low code, even no code platform, and then bifurcate into maybe three buckets of what are the strategic points that we need to think about with our audience, and then what are some of the operational components and perhaps governance related stuff as a third thread. But even before we go into this, I'm just curiosity wise, do you think no code is even a viable,
Yeah.
or is it just hey, nice to say that, nice to hear it, but is that even plausible?
Yeah, look, I mean, you have to separate the marketing from reality, or the wheat from the chaff, as they say.
Yeah.
Um, Look, this has always been, the North Star for development tool providers, right? That rapid application development tools, drag and drop wizards and all of this stuff. And simple things, sure, you could do with the drag drop, connect some arrows and off you go. But the moment you get to, things that need to communicate with something else, get data from somewhere, so on, elements of coding do come in, right? Now, do you consider a script on the platform code? Okay, well, if you say no, it's not code, then sure, there's no code. But you talk to anybody else, and they'll be like, "Yeah, I coded something today."
That's right.
So, anyways, right, the no code, I think we just have to
Just
take with the
ignore that part. No, but I do think that business users were compelled to look into it with that promise, if I can say that, right? That the at least inside an insurance company, a lot of the stuff gets done in Excels and access databases and whatnot and SharePoints and stuff like that. And so this promise was that, hey, you don't need to depend on IT, you don't need to do even line of code or whatever, right? So I think that created a lot of interest. So which brings up this first strategic question is, yes, it has been enabling over the last decade or so, a little bit of modernization on building some capabilities without a full dependency on the IT team. And maybe these capabilities were, surrounded on the CX/US side of it, on surrounding the core policy or admin billing systems. But I'm just curious if we take that as a premise. I have a point of view that I think they have been relatively successful in my experience. Most insurance carriers have done one or more projects using these tools in that use case, and I think they've seen some value derived from it. I'm curious if you think if you define success in that way, do you see it as successful?
Yeah. I mean, look, the 2, 3 comments I guess I would make. First is these software providers are in market, and at least if you believe the stats from Gartner, they've been growing double digits year over year. So somebody's buying the software and paying
Correct.
good money for it, right? So there's a place for it in an enterprise. So to that extent, right, you should conclude that they have been successful. So then you move secondly, right? Okay, well, why are companies buying this software and what are they doing with it? So at least in the insurance orgs, I have seen, I would say, this full spectrum of usage from use a low code application platform for experimentation and rapid kind of innovation, so forth. I've also seen it where, and I'm talking like 8, 9 years ago, not even like in recent times, where a CIO has made a bold move and said any application development we do is going to be on this low code platform. And then I've also seen this more in recent years, and I'm talking about actual kind of projects that I've been associated with, building core capabilities. So for a TPA, for example, enrollment and benefit administration on a custom built software application using one of these mainstream low code platforms.
Yeah.
So I've seen this
Yeah.
full spectrum, and again, you can say that the fact that this is occurring is evidence of success of these platforms. And then the third comment I would make is that while all this has been the case, my general, and this is a broad generalization, but general observation is that insurers are still using vendor provided core systems. Very few, if any, are saying, you know what, let me build my own using one of these low code platforms. So at
Although I know
insurers, the
some,
usage is on, peripheral capabilities or on experimenting. I've seen, let's launch a new product to see what the market, how the market responds, not on our core platform, but on this other stack. And if the product has legs, then eventually we'll move it over to the core platform.
correct. And some players in that leading enterprise low code platforms were already beginning to say, hey, we are the next generation policy system for you, and so I saw that trend, and I think that has faded away because of the sustainable, scalable point of view there. But to your point, I think I think that spectrum has relatively succeeded, and I also think that to your point, I think if it's a big strategic project, perhaps they will go through the traditional route. But for projects that are lower priority, there's not a whole lot of IT budget or resources. I think people are still using some of these tools to execute on these projects. And I've also seen, SI players who have a huge outsourcing arrangement with these insurance carriers also bring some of these tools to the forefront and say, hey, now we can help you be more agile and more build more capacity for you to build applications if you allow us to start building through these platforms, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think I've seen that too. So yeah, really, just to kind of be clear about, I think what we're saying is that there is a role for these platforms in an insurance enterprise. Leaders should think about it strategically. That what role do they want these to play? The few that we've seen, right, are a ability to modernize incrementally by building out capabilities one at a time, and the ones that become useful, then move them over to some core platform. Second is contending with capacity issues, right? As an organization, you can take on 2, 3, 4, 10, whatever, some number of large modernization projects. Well, what about everything else? So having teams that can use these kinds of platforms can still make progress without having to wait for traditional teams
Right.
to become available. And then enhancing agility, like you commented, right? That's another reason where this could be used. And we didn't so far touch on it, but there is a cost optimization, component to it as well. That if you don't need, traditional
Full IT stack, I guess, right? Yeah.
yeah, full stack and all the capabilities that come with redundancy and backups and all of this kind of stuff. If that does not, if it's not needed, well, let's not spend resources just because hey, that's our standard. Everything uses it. So
Yeah. Yeah. But given that there's also this notion of citizen developer, and I think in insurance I've seen this, and I think many larger insurance companies and have actually used these low code platforms to cultivate this notion of citizen developer. And I think so in that sense also I think it has created a new wave of collaborative innovation happening within the enterprise. I think we can talk about has that created more complexity or less complexity? But curious if you've seen this citizen developer concept pervade in at least larger enterprise insurance companies.
yeah, I think I've seen this as a mixed story. To be candid, in terms of how effective and successful it's been. So to this point around low code app platforms being a pathway to give airtime to lower priority initiatives that in their own right have value. So if your typical software development teams are tied up, well, who else is going to do this work? So that's where the
Right.
citizen developer concept comes in. If you can train other roles in the company to still have a system oriented mindset, right? Methodical, analytical, rules oriented. Yeah, I think that's where the citizen developer sort of idea comes in. And some places it's successful, other places it turns out that the this analytical nature of a software developer is at odds with the creative nature that some other role requires. And if you put the tools in the hands of that type of person, sure, they may create something, but not of good quality, not very useful, has to be
Yeah. And is
re-implemented
it
anyhow.
widely, is it something that you can, put it across your entire enterprise? I think
Yeah,
those are all the questions that come back
yeah.
up. What about
But
this
but where
notion that,
where where I've seen it successful is that let's say if it requires whatever one person to spend time on it, well, you end up pairing a little bit of time from your traditional software engineer with most of the time from a trained non-IT person. Um, so then you get this leverage of few people collaborating with non-IT folks that have the mindset, are able to go further and do more.
yeah. Well, but it is I have seen it successful when the use case is simple enough and say, okay, we're going to use this tool, a low-code tool to build a user interface for an agent to submit an application or an abridged version of a claim or even a consumer to submit whatever information required as part of the enrollment and whatnot, and then you just dump it into a database, and then it just does that one simple use case from taking data from a source and then putting it into a database. The moment you start thinking about, okay, now I need to submit a claim or pull the information from the policy system or send it to the financial system, or once you start integrating with other back-end systems, I still think that people have been contending with this full cycle of complexity to integrate with upstream and downstream systems, and then suddenly you're back to, is it still now a low code rapid development system, or we're back to the traditional software?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sort of prompts, I think, two aspects of our discussion here. So one is that how many processes in a organization are truly isolated versus right, you do something, why? Because it's the beginning of something else, or it's the middle step of what's to come next, right? So there's not to say there are none, right? But there are few things that are start to finish isolated enough that they could be done standalone, which is where this notion of governance comes in, right? That, okay, sure, I implemented something rapidly with a low code platform for bringing in enrollment information from a particular broker that is sending info in a certain way. Now, that is not the end of the story, right? You need to still feed in your enrollment process. That data has to move forward. So all of a sudden, you glued one solution with another solution, and unfortunately, right, the characteristics are such that the lowest common denominator is what the overall solution ends up exhibiting as characteristics. So
Yeah.
that's where the governance part, I think, is important, right? That strategically you have an idea that we're going to use these platforms for innovation, for agility, for moving fast on non core capabilities, but the guardrails must be there. That sure, use it for this limited situation. The moment it crosses over into something beyond that, well, okay, now let's think about rolling this into our more standard enterprise platform and stack.
This idea that, as I mentioned previously, right? So business users developing software. Yeah, I think in an insurance company, as long as I've been in this space, I've always seen it, right? Excel-based apps will be there, and used to be Access-based, and then before that, Lotus Notes databases were all over the place.
Yeah.
And so So this whole idea of shadow IT is a concept that is pretty prevalent in the insurance. Hopefully, our audience will it will resonate with them. But does this low code, no code, and it's just not these coding platforms, but there's a lot of tools coming in that kind of replaces an Excel on the SaaS or replaces an Access database like and has it created further exacerbated shadow IT inside? So it's just like the negative side of the proliferation of these, low code tools.
Yeah, I think I would say early days of these tools was certainly that way. The current generation of them, I think they do come with sort of enterprise capabilities. So you can control who has access to it. You can control what they do with it. You can control, deployment processes, things like that, from a centrally governed, platform management standpoint. I would say that the risk is there, and the tools are there to kind of monitor and prevent it as well. So I think a little bit of both, I guess, is the case. That yes, the risk is there, but you also have ability to manage it.
Yeah. Um, I guess then the last thing that we touched on at the beginning is, and it was referenced in the Gartner article, is also that how does the proliferation of LLM enabled code generation play into this low code enterprise platform space? And it's a fascinating topic in itself. And I see you chuckling, and I think you and I were looking at a couple of these vendor homepages, and now they're like, oh, we can generate code with LLM, we can prompt you with code suggestions and things like that. And so I'm just curious your point of view on that.
Yeah, and perhaps we sort of cover this as a standalone topic because there are some interesting aspects of this to unpack. But let me just start with the three basic ones. So there's one scenario which is as an individual, I can use uh, your mainstream LLMs, ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you, and go type a prompt and ask it to create me some code, let's call it Python code, to perform some task, right? So, okay, I got the code, but I still need ability to execute the code and all of that, right? So I need a platform to run the code. As an individual, do I have access to it? Do I not? I have to contend with that. So, second situation is that I'm a software engineer and I have access to code generators within my software development toolset. Um, so this is this idea of the co-pilots built into your day job tools, right? So we're not talking about either of those cases here. So here we're talking about this third situation, which is I have a low-code platform and it gives me ability to create applications. And oh, by the way, embedded in it is some kind of prompting capability, which so I'm genuinely curious, right, what that actually even looks like. Because
Yeah.
if I'm a low code platform, why do we need a prompt to generate code,
I'm
right?
fascinated myself, and yeah, then it becomes now we just said that no code is not possible, and now we're saying, well, from low code to LLM, it should logically, mathematically equate to no code.
Yeah, yeah. And look, this is my naivety and lack of kind of exploration of these tools here. So as I learn more about it, I'll have a more informed kind of point of view. But if any of you out there, right, have experimented with this, I genuinely would like to understand a little bit more. Uh, you know, just at a conceptual level, right? What does it mean to have a code generator in a low code platform? What you can do with it and all that, we can talk more. But just even conceptually, I'd like to have a better understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one thing I've been thinking about is with the core systems for policy, billing, and claims already taken care of, then if that construct is still true that some third party vendor an insurance company will buy software from some third party for these core central engines of the insurance company, then what is left off is kind of the chassis, the surround and the wheels and all that good stuff. Perhaps all of that could be developed through some sort of a conversational LLM interface. So I'm just making that story up to pique your interest to see if that's where all of this is evolving, that it may truly become, very, very low code at that point, that these models will spin up user interfaces and workflows on the fly. And then you just do some minor coding and minor edits to modify that and then deploy it against whatever use cases.
Yeah.
So I know
I,
that touches
I
on a little bit of a pontification side of it.
Yeah, I think more than pontification, it's forecasting how the future is going to unfold, and all these futures are possible. Which one is the one that will unfold? We just have to wait and see. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got um, LLMs built into UI UX tools. You've got them built into your traditional software development tools. You've got them built into low code platforms. You've got them built into your core systems, right? You've got them built into um, even auxiliary systems that provide them. So where it sort of leaves me, right, as a tech professional working in insurance, is that it's back to the role of good old enterprise architecture, right? What characteristics do you want? You can't get all of them. You have to trade off something for the other, and you have to be clear on, based on your outcome you're after, which particular path makes sense. So yeah, I still see there's a role for custom built applications in an insurance enterprise. I see these to be more on the periphery to the core, not the core itself. And consider these platforms for those kinds of development, and the rest,
And then wait and watch
let's
on
see.
how these other innovations transpire, right?
Yeah. Let's be watchful and see how it evolves.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great closing. I do think that we just have to keep an eye on this, and that's part of what we're doing on this podcast series is bringing forth and sharing to a degree our point of view, maybe even touching on a little bit of forecasting and predictions, but not go too far down that path. But like you earlier said, I think we would welcome anyone in our audience who has a much more deeper vantage point on experimenting within an insurance company with these tools and seeing if you have a different way of using these tools in the core. I think I'd love to have them on the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. If any of you are in that 15% of enterprises that are using a low code platform for a mission critical capability, I'd love to talk more.
Yeah.
What are you doing, and what can others learn from that?
Yeah. With that, I think we should wrap this episode up. So please continue to support it as you've always done. Like it, comment, share, and subscribe, and reach out to us on any one of these channels or in LinkedIn. And hope to see you again on the next episode.
Thanks. Take care.
And that's a wrap for today's conversation on PremiumBytes, where we shine a light on the unsung world of insurance technology leaders. Thank you for joining us on this adventure and being part of our community. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and follow us. Until next time, take care.